I thought I knew what betrayal felt like until the day my lawyer called me with news that shattered everything I believed about my 23-year marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from where it all began to unravel, because if you're watching this from your living room in Kansas or your kitchen in Florida, or wherever you are in this world, please drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Your stories keep me going, and trust me, after what I'm about to tell you, I need all the connection I can get. My name is Rebecca, and for most of my adult life, I lived what everyone around me called a charmed existence. Picture this, a colonial house in Westchester County with white shutters and climbing roses, 2 successful kids, and a husband who still opened car doors for me after 2 decades together. Michael Chen, yes, he kept his name and I kept mine when we married back in 2001, was the kind of man who remembered anniversaries, brought me coffee in bed on Sundays, and never once raised his voice during an argument. He was a financial advisor with his own practice, the type who wore pressed khakis on weekends and actually enjoyed mowing the lawn in perfect diagonal strips. I was a freelance marketing consultant, working mostly with small non-profits, which meant I could set my own schedule and be present for soccer games and school plays. We weren't wealthy by Westchester standards, but we were comfortable. More than comfortable. We were happy. Or so I believed. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in early October. I was sitting at our kitchen island, laptop open, working on a campaign for a local animal shelter when Michael's phone buzzed on the granite counter. He was upstairs getting dressed for work, and normally I wouldn't have glanced at his messages. Privacy was sacred in our house. But something about the notification preview made me freeze. The text was from someone named Jessica, and the preview showed just enough to make my stomach drop. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about. My hands started trembling as I stared at that screen. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never once suspected Michael of cheating. He traveled occasionally for work, sure, but he always called every night. He never worked late without explanation. He'd never given me a single reason to doubt him. But there it was, staring at me from his iPhone screen. A message that could only mean one thing. When Michael came downstairs, coffee mug in hand, checking his phone, I watched his face carefully. Nothing. No guilt, no panic, no telltale signs. He kissed my forehead like he did every morning, asked if I needed anything from the store, and headed off to catch the 7:42 train into Manhattan like it was any other Tuesday. I couldn't focus on work. That text message played on repeat in my mind. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about. About what? About him? About whatever they'd done together while I was home, probably watching Netflix and grading papers for the continuing education course I taught on Thursday evenings. If you've ever been in a situation like this, hit the like button and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and revenge. And if you haven't experienced this particular brand of betrayal, consider yourself lucky, but keep watching, because this story has twists you won't see coming. I tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Jessica was a client, celebrating a successful investment. Maybe the message was about a business deal, not a romantic encounter. But even as I ran through these possibilities, I knew I was grasping at straws. The preview had been too intimate, too personal. That evening, I watched Michael across the dinner table as he told me about his day. He seemed completely normal, relaxed, engaged, asking about my animal shelter campaign with genuine interest. Either he was an incredible actor, or I was losing my mind. "How was your day, really?" I asked, searching his eyes for any hint of deception. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth, and gave me that slightly puzzled smile I'd loved for over 2 decades. "Fine, honey. Same old Tuesday. Why?" "Just curious. You seem, I don't know, different lately." This was a lie. He didn't seem different at all, which was somehow worse. If he was having an affair, shouldn't there be signs? Shouldn't I have sensed something was wrong in my own marriage? Different how? He reached across the table and took my hand. His wedding ring caught the light from our chandelier, the one we'd picked out together when we'd renovated the dining room 5 years ago. Everything in this house held memories. Everything felt solid, permanent, real. Never mind, I said. Just one of those days, I guess. But it wasn't just one of those days. That night, after Michael fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his steady breathing. The man I'd shared a bed with for over 2 decades, the father of my children, the person who knew I liked my coffee with just a splash of half and half and that I couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, was he really capable of living a double life? The next morning, I made a decision that would set everything in motion. I was going to find out who Jessica was. I started small. I checked Michael's social media accounts, but he barely used them. His LinkedIn showed professional connections, all above board. His Facebook hadn't been updated in months. Instagram was mostly pictures of our family vacations and our golden retriever, Murphy. Then I remembered his work phone. Michael had 2 phones, his personal iPhone and a work-provided Android for business calls. He usually left the work phone charging in his office when he was home, treating it like a landline. I felt sick as I climbed the stairs to his home office. This wasn't who I was. I'd never been the type of wife who snooped, who checked up on her husband, who violated privacy out of suspicion. But I also couldn't live with the uncertainty eating away at me. The office door was open. Michael's work phone sat on his desk, plugged into the charger. My heart hammered as I picked it up, grateful he'd never been paranoid enough to use different passwords for his devices. The text messages told a story I wasn't prepared for. Jessica wasn't just some random woman. She was his business partner's daughter, 28 years old, working as a marketing coordinator at a firm in Manhattan. The message history went back months. Months of flirtation, planning, intimate conversations about everything from weekend getaways to what they wanted to do to each other. But it was worse than just an affair. As I scrolled through their exchanges, a more complex picture emerged. Jessica knew about me. She knew about our kids. She knew about our anniversary trip to Napa that we'd taken just 6 weeks earlier, because Michael had texted her from the vineyard, complaining about how I never wanted to try anything new anymore. The betrayal cut so deep I had to sit down in Michael's desk chair to keep from collapsing. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis. This was a deliberate, sustained deception that had been going on right under my nose while I planned family dinners and anniversary surprises. I took pictures of the most damning messages with my own phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Then I put his phone back exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to throw up. That night, Michael came home with flowers, grocery store carnations, not even my favorite peonies, but flowers nonetheless. Just because, he said, kissing my cheek as he handed them over. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the flowers in his face and demand answers. Instead, I smiled and thanked him, because I needed time to think. I needed to figure out my next move. Because if Michael thought he could live a double life, he was about to learn that 2 could play that game. And unlike him, I was going to be very, very good at it. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. I functioned normally, grocery shopping, client calls, dinner prep, but inside, I felt like I was watching my life through glass. Every kiss goodbye, every casual conversation, every "how was your day, honey," felt like performance art. Michael was performing the role of devoted husband, and I was performing the role of unsuspecting wife. But I wasn't unsuspecting anymore. I was gathering intelligence. I started small, with details that had been staring me in the face for months. Michael's Tuesday evening client dinners that had become more frequent. The new cologne that had appeared in our bathroom, a woodsy scent I'd complimented but never chosen for him. The way he'd been taking his phone to the bathroom with him, something he'd never done before. Most telling of all were the credit card statements. Michael handled our finances, which had never bothered me before. I had access to everything, but I trusted him to manage the day-to-day details. Now, going through 3 months of statements with a highlighter and a notebook, I saw the pattern. Restaurants I'd never heard of. Hotel charges on days when he claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. A jewelry store purchase for $340 in September, right around the time Jessica had posted a photo on Instagram wearing delicate gold earrings I'd never seen before. I found that Instagram post by creating a fake account under the name Marie Stevens, using a stock photo of a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile. It took me 2 days to find Jessica's account through her company's page, and when I did, my heart sank all over again. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women just are, long dark hair, bright smile, the kind of bone structure that looked good in any lighting. But more than that, she looked young. Not just chronologically young, though at 28 she was 15 years younger than me, but young in spirit. Her photos showed someone who went to rooftop bars and music festivals, who traveled to places like Iceland and Thailand, who seemed to approach life as an adventure rather than a responsibility. Looking at her Instagram was like looking at a version of myself I'd never been, or maybe a version I'd forgotten I used to be. When had I stopped wanting adventure? When had I become someone who chose comfort over excitement? But this wasn't about my shortcomings as a wife. This was about Michael's choice to betray our marriage instead of talking to me about whatever was missing. The more I dug, the angrier I became. And anger, I discovered, was much more useful than heartbreak. I hired a private investigator on Thursday morning. Her name was Diana Reeves, and she operated out of a small office in White Plains that smelled like coffee and determination. Diana was probably in her 50s, with short silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen everything twice. "How long have you suspected?" she asked, sliding a contract across her desk. "A week," I admitted. But looking back, there were signs I missed. "There always are," Diana said matter-of-factly. "The question is, what do you want me to find? Proof of the affair? Financial impropriety? Something else?" I thought about that. What did I want? Proof, yes, but proof of what, exactly? "Everything," I said finally. "I want to know everything." Diana nodded. "It'll take about 2 weeks for a full workup. Photos, financial records, communication patterns, the works. You sure you're ready for everything? Because in my experience, everything is usually more than people bargain for." I signed the contract and wrote her a check for the retainer. "I'm ready." But I wasn't ready. Nobody ever is. While Diana worked, I threw myself into what I started thinking of as my own investigation. I became a student of my husband's habits, tracking patterns I'd ignored for years. Tuesday and Thursday evenings were Jessica nights. I could tell by the extra care he took with his appearance, the way he checked his phone more frequently, the subtle shift in his energy when he left the house. I also started paying attention to our kids' reactions when they called or visited. Our daughter Emma, 21 and finishing her senior year at Syracuse, had always been Daddy's girl. But during our last video call, she'd seemed distant when I mentioned that Dad was working late again. "He's been working a lot lately, hasn't he?" she'd said, and something in her tone made me wonder if she'd noticed things I'd missed. Our son Jake, 19 and at Penn State, was less observant but more direct. During his last visit home, he'd asked point blank, "Are you and Dad okay? You guys seem weird lately." "Weird how?" I'd asked. "I don't know. Like you're not really talking to each other. Like you're both pretending everything's fine when it's not." Out of the mouths of babes. Even our kids could sense the fault lines in our marriage, and they didn't even know what was causing them. I started documenting everything in a leather journal I kept hidden in my craft room. Michael never went in there. He claimed my scrapbooking supplies gave him anxiety, so it was the perfect hiding place. Every suspicious phone call, every unexplained absence, every time he showered immediately after coming home from work went into that journal. The strangest part was how easy it was to live this double life. I'd been married to Michael for 23 years, but I'd apparently learned very little about deception. He, on the other hand, was a master at it. He never slipped up, never left his phone unattended, never showed the slightest sign of guilt or nervousness. If I hadn't seen that first text message, I might never have suspected anything. Which made me wonder, how long had this been going on? How many other women had there been? How much of my marriage had been built on lies? These questions consumed me during the day, but at night, lying next to Michael in our king-sized bed, a different kind of torture took over. Sometimes he'd reach for me in his sleep, his arm falling across my waist in the unconscious gesture of 23 years of shared sleep. And for a moment, I'd forget. For a moment, I'd remember loving this man, trusting this man, building a life with this man. Then I'd remember Jessica, and the anger would surge back, hot and bright and sustaining. 2 weeks after I'd hired Diana, she called me on a Friday morning while Michael was at work. "We need to meet," she said. "Today, if possible. I have your report." Something in her voice made my stomach clench. "Is it bad?" "It's thorough," Diana said diplomatically. "Can you come in around 2?" I rearranged my afternoon client call and drove to Diana's office with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Whatever she'd found, it was going to change everything. There would be no more wondering, no more hoping I was wrong, no more living in the suspended animation of uncertainty. Diana's office felt smaller when I walked in that afternoon, like the walls had moved closer together while I wasn't looking. She had a manila folder on her desk, thick with photographs and documents. "Before we start," she said, "I want you to know that everything I'm about to show you is factual and documented. I also want you to know that you don't have to look at all of it today. We can take this at whatever pace you need." I shook my head. "Show me everything." Diana opened the folder. The first photograph was of Michael and Jessica leaving a restaurant in Stamford, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. He used to guide me that way when we were dating. "This was taken last Tuesday," Diana said. They had dinner at Meridian, then went back to her apartment on the east side. She showed me more photos. Michael and Jessica walking hand in hand through Central Park. Michael and Jessica entering and leaving hotels in Manhattan and Connecticut. Michael and Jessica kissing in the parking lot of a Whole Foods, so comfortable with their public affection that they clearly weren't worried about being seen. But the photographs, devastating as they were, weren't the worst part. "There's something else," Diana said, her voice gentler than it had been. "About the financial records." She pulled out a bank statement I didn't recognize. Michael's name was on it, but it was an account I'd never seen before. "He opened this account 8 months ago," Diana explained. "It's been receiving regular transfers from your joint checking account, small amounts, a few hundred here and there, nothing that would be obvious in your monthly statements." I stared at the numbers. Over 8 months, Michael had siphoned off nearly $12,000 from our joint account into this secret account. Money that had been paying for his dates with Jessica, his hotel rooms, his gifts to her. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd stolen from our family to do it. "There's one more thing," Diana said. She hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. "Tell me." "Jessica isn't the first. Based on the financial patterns and some of the surveillance, I believe there have been at least 2 other relationships in the past 3 years. Shorter term, but definitely sexual in nature." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of Diana's desk, trying to process what she was telling me. Not just one affair. Multiple affairs. Years of deception. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," Diana said. "I know this isn't what you were hoping to hear." But she was wrong. This wasn't what I'd been hoping to hear. It was exactly what I'd needed to hear. Because now I knew the truth. And now I could do something about it. "Thank you," I managed to say. "This is exactly what I needed." Diana looked surprised. "Are you going to confront him?" I thought about that as I gathered up the photographs and documents, evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal of our marriage and our family. "Oh, I'm going to do much more than confront him," I said. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. I drove home from Diana's office in a strange state of clarity. The hurt was still there, a constant ache in my chest like I'd been holding my breath for 2 weeks, but underneath it was something sharper, cleaner, purpose. Michael thought he was smart. He thought he'd built his secret life carefully enough that I'd never discover it. But he'd underestimated me, and that was going to be his downfall. I spent that weekend playing the perfect wife while my mind raced through possibilities. Michael was unusually attentive, bringing me coffee in bed Saturday morning and suggesting we take Murphy for a long walk through our neighborhood. We strolled past the houses of couples we'd known for decades, exchanging waves and small talk about the unseasonably warm October weather. "We should have the Johnsons over for dinner soon," Michael said as we passed their Tudor-style home. "It's been too long." I smiled and agreed, all while thinking about the photographs Diana had shown me. The Michael who was suggesting dinner parties was the same Michael who'd been funding hotel rooms with money stolen from our joint account. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. But I was learning to compartmentalize. I had to. Sunday evening, while Michael was downstairs watching football, I called my sister Lauren from our bedroom. Lauren lived in Boston with her husband of 15 years, and she'd always been my closest confidant. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything, not yet. Instead, I asked her something that had been nagging at me. "Do you remember Mom and Dad's divorce?" I said, settling into the reading chair by our bedroom window. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Our parents had divorced when I was 22 and Lauren was 24, so we'd been adults, but it had still rocked our world. Dad had left Mom for his secretary, a cliché so textbook it would have been funny if it hadn't destroyed our mother. "Of course I remember," Lauren said. "Why are you asking?" "Do you remember how Mom handled it? Legally, I mean." "She got destroyed," Lauren said bluntly. Dad had been planning for months, maybe years. He'd moved money around, prepared his exit strategy. By the time Mom figured out what was happening, he'd already protected himself. She ended up with almost nothing. "What would you have done differently if you'd been in her position?" Lauren was quiet for so long I wondered if we'd lost connection. Then she said, "Rebecca, is everything okay with you and Michael?" "I'm just curious," I said. "Hypothetically." Another pause. "Hypothetically, I would have gotten my own lawyer before he knew I suspected anything. I would have documented everything. And I would have made sure I had my own financial security before making any moves." After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair staring out at our backyard. Michael had spent last weekend raking leaves into perfect piles, then burning them in the fire pit we'd installed 3 years ago. We'd made s'mores and talked about our plans for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for the spring garden. All while he was living a completely separate life. But Lauren's advice was sound. If I was going to do this right, I needed my own lawyer. Monday morning, I called Emma at Syracuse. My daughter was in her senior year studying communications, and she'd always been sharp about reading people. If anyone might have insights into her father's recent behavior, it would be her. "Mom." Emma's voice was rushed. "I'm between classes. What's up?" "I just wanted to check in," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "You seemed a little distant during our last call." "I'm fine. Just stressed about applications for grad school and work and everything." She paused. "Actually, Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is Dad okay? When I called him last week, he seemed, I don't know, different. Like he was distracted or had somewhere else to be." My pulse quickened. "Different how?" "He kept checking his phone during our conversation. And he asked me weird questions about what I thought about relationships with big age differences. Like, out of nowhere. It was bizarre." I closed my eyes. Even with our children, Michael couldn't help himself from seeking validation for his choices. "Maybe he's just stressed about work," I suggested. "Maybe," Emma said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Mom, are you guys okay? I mean, you and Dad." The question I'd been dreading. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. Something feels off when I talk to either of you lately. Like you're both pretending everything's fine when it's not." "Smart girl. Too smart." "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I lied. "We're just dealing with some work stress. Nothing for you to worry about." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at Michael's coffee mug from that morning. He'd left it in the sink, a small act of thoughtlessness that had never bothered me before but now felt symbolic. 23 years of marriage, and he couldn't even rinse his own coffee mug. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney for that afternoon. Margaret Walsh had been recommended by a friend of a friend, someone who'd gone through a contentious divorce 2 years earlier and emerged financially intact. Margaret's office was in downtown White Plains, in a building that screamed competence and discretion. Margaret herself was probably in her early 50s, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of handshake that suggested she'd been underestimated by men her entire career and had learned to use it to her advantage. "What can I do for you, Rebecca?" she asked once we were settled in her office. I told her everything. The text message, the investigation, Diana's findings, the secret bank account, the multiple affairs. Margaret took notes on a legal pad, her expression never changing. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "How long have you been married?" 23 years. Children? 2. Both adults, in college. Assets? I gave her the rundown. The house in Westchester, worth about $850,000 with a mortgage balance of roughly $200,000. Michael's business, which I honestly couldn't value. Our retirement accounts, which Michael managed. The college funds we'd set up for Emma and Jake. "Here's what we're going to do," Margaret said. "First, you're going to start gathering documentation of everything. Bank statements, tax returns, business records, anything you can get your hands on. Second, you're going to open your own checking account and start establishing financial independence. Third, you're not going to confront your husband until we have a complete picture of your assets and his hidden activities." "How long will that take?" "Depends on how cooperative he is when we finally approach him. Could be weeks, could be months. The key is that you maintain the status quo until we're ready to move. Can you do that?" I thought about going home that evening, making dinner for Michael, asking about his day, pretending not to notice when his phone buzzed with messages from Jessica. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. "Good. In my experience, the spouse who's better prepared usually comes out ahead. And right now, your husband has no idea you're preparing for anything." That evening, Michael came home with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. "Thought we could have a relaxed night," he said, unpacking containers of pad Thai and green curry. "Maybe watch that movie you mentioned." I couldn't remember mentioning any movie, but I nodded and helped set the table. We ate dinner and made small talk about our days, carefully edited versions of our days, I now realized. Then we settled on the couch to watch something on Netflix. Michael's phone buzzed 3 times during the movie. Each time, he glanced at it but didn't respond. The restraint was almost admirable. "Popular night," I commented after the third buzz. "Work stuff," he said without looking at me. "I'll deal with it tomorrow." I wanted to grab his phone, to shout at him to stop lying, to demand that he explain how he could sit here next to me, his wife of 23 years, while his girlfriend texted him from her apartment in Stamford. Instead, I curled up against his shoulder and said, "This is nice. Just the two of us." He kissed the top of my head. "It is." And the saddest part was, I think he meant it. I think Michael had convinced himself that he could have both lives, the comfortable domesticity of our marriage and the excitement of his affairs. He thought he could compartmentalize his deception so completely that it wouldn't touch what we had together. But what we had together was already gone. He'd killed it the first time he'd chosen someone else over our marriage. I was just the only one who knew it was dead. Over the next week, I became a woman possessed. I photographed bank statements, tax returns, and business documents. I opened my own checking account at a different bank and started transferring small amounts from our joint account, nothing that would trigger alerts, just enough to build my own financial foundation. I also started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Michael's business partner, Richard, had mentioned at a party last month that they were considering expanding the practice. I'd assumed that was good news, but now I wondered if Michael was planning to cash out before our divorce. I made copies of everything I could find related to his business, including partnership agreements and client lists. If Michael thought he could hide assets in his practice, he was going to be disappointed. The hardest part was maintaining our normal routine. Tuesday evening, Michael left for another client dinner, and I knew he was going to see Jessica. I sat at our kitchen island with a glass of wine and my laptop, working on a proposal for a new client, while my husband was probably in a hotel room 20 minutes away. But I was playing a longer game now. Every day that passed was another day for me to gather evidence, to strengthen my position, to prepare for the confrontation that was coming. Michael had spent months planning his secret life. Now it was my turn to plan. And unlike him, I wasn't going to get caught. 2 weeks into my secret preparation, I was getting good at living a double life. Too good, maybe. I could kiss Michael goodbye in the morning while mentally cataloguing which documents I planned to photograph that day. I could make dinner conversation while calculating how much money he'd stolen from our joint account for his latest hotel rendezvous. The scariest part wasn't the deception, it was how natural it felt. I'd always thought of myself as a terrible liar, someone whose face gave away every emotion. But turns out, when your survival depends on it, you can learn to wear any mask you need. Margaret had been right about maintaining the status quo. Michael suspected nothing. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than he'd been in months, probably because the guilt of living a double life was being offset by the thrill of getting away with it. But I was about to discover that Michael's deceptions ran deeper than even Diana's investigation had revealed. It started with Jake's phone call on a Thursday evening. Our son was calling from Penn State, where he was majoring in business, and he sounded stressed. "Mom, can I ask you something about Dad's business?" Michael was upstairs showering, getting ready for another evening with Jessica, I assumed, so I could speak freely. "What about it?" "Well, you know how he's always talking about expanding the practice, maybe bringing in new partners." "Yes." Though honestly, I'd stopped paying close attention to Michael's work stories months ago. They all seemed to blend together: client meetings, market analyses, partnership discussions. A friend of mine, his dad works in finance too, and he mentioned that Dad's been asking around about selling his client list. Like, quietly. Does that seem weird to you? Everything stopped. I set down the dish I'd been drying and gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean, selling his client list?" "I don't know the details. Just that someone at Dad's level doesn't usually sell their client list unless they're planning to leave the business entirely. Or unless they need cash fast." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Why would Michael be looking to sell his client list? His business was successful, or at least it appeared to be. We weren't in financial trouble, or we hadn't been before he started his secret spending spree. Unless there was something I didn't know. The next morning, after Michael left for work, I drove to Diana's office without an appointment. "I need you to dig deeper into Michael's business," I told her. "Something's not right." Diana looked up from her computer. "What kind of not right?" I told her about Jake's phone call. Diana made notes, then pulled up a file on her computer. "I did basic due diligence on his practice when I was investigating the personal stuff," she said. "But you're right, I should have looked more closely at the financials. Give me a week." But I didn't have to wait a week. The truth came looking for me. Saturday morning, Michael was in his office catching up on paperwork when the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen making coffee, so I answered it. A man in his 40s stood on our front porch, wearing jeans and a worried expression. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Mrs. Chen? I'm sorry to bother you at home. I'm David Martinez. I'm one of your husband's clients." Now I recognized him. Michael had mentioned the Martinez account several times, a family who'd been with him for over 10 years, planning for their kids' college educations. "Is everything okay?" I asked. David shifted uncomfortably. "I was hoping to speak with Michael. I've been trying to reach him all week, but his office says he's unavailable, and he's not returning my calls." "His home," I said. "Let me get him for you." "Actually," David said quickly, Maybe I should explain the situation to you first. It's complicated. Something in his tone made me step outside and close the door behind me. Whatever David Martinez needed to tell me, I had a feeling it wasn't something Michael wanted me to hear. What's going on? David took a deep breath. 3 months ago, Michael recommended that we move our retirement funds into a new investment vehicle. He said it was an exclusive opportunity, very high return, very low risk. We trusted him. We've been with him for 10 years. We moved everything. My stomach started to sink. And the investment company doesn't exist, David said flatly. I finally got suspicious this week and did some research. The company Michael showed us, Golden Gate Securities, it's not registered with the SEC. There's no record of it anywhere. I felt like the world was tilting. Are you saying? I'm saying your husband took our retirement savings, $340,000, and I have no idea where it went. And I'm guessing we're not the only ones. I invited David inside and made him coffee while he explained the full situation. Golden Gate Securities were supposedly based in California, specializing in alternative investments for high-net-worth clients. Michael had presented it as an opportunity for the Martinez family to significantly boost their retirement savings. The documents looked legitimate, David said, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. Professional letterhead, detailed prospectuses, everything you'd expect. Michael walked us through every page. I looked at the documents David showed me. They did look professional, too professional, like someone had spent considerable time and effort creating convincing fake investment materials. Have you contacted the police? I asked. Not yet. I wanted to give Michael a chance to explain first. But Mrs. Chen, if this is what it looks like. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If this was what it looked like, my husband wasn't just a cheating spouse, he was a criminal. Michael chose that moment to come downstairs, probably wondering who was visiting on a Saturday morning. When he saw David Martinez sitting at our kitchen island, his face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Surprise, recognition, fear, and finally a forced smile. David, he said, extending his hand. What brings you by? David didn't take the offered handshake. You know exactly what brings me by. I want to know where my money is. For the first time since I'd known him, Michael looked genuinely rattled. But he recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. David's face hardened. Golden Gate Securities, Michael. The $340,000 you convinced us to invest 3 months ago. The company that doesn't exist. I watched my husband's face carefully. For just a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw panic in his eyes. Then he put his hands up in a placating gesture. David, there's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding. Let me get my files and we can clear this up right away. But David was already standing. There's no misunderstanding. I've done my research. Golden Gate Securities isn't registered with the SEC. There's no corporate filing, no business address, nothing. You created fake investment documents and stole our money. That's a serious accusation, Michael said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone I'd heard him use in business calls for years. I would never. Save it, David interrupted. I'm giving you 1 week to return our money. All of it. If I don't hear from you by next Saturday, I'm going to the police and the SEC. After David left, Michael and I stood in our kitchen staring at each other. I could practically see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I'd understood, what I might do with the information. That was strange, he finally said. David seemed really upset about something. Michael, I said quietly, is it true? About Golden Gate Securities. He looked directly into my eyes and lied to my face. Of course not. David's obviously confused about something. I'll call the office Monday and straighten it out. If I hadn't already known Michael was a liar and a cheat, I might have believed him. His performance was convincing, just the right mix of confusion and concern. But I knew better now. Okay, I said. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Michael smiled and kissed my forehead. Don't worry about it, honey. It's just a misunderstanding. That afternoon, while Michael was supposedly running errands but probably seeing Jessica, I called Diana. We have a problem, I said. Michael isn't just cheating. He's embezzling from his clients. I told her about David Martinez's visit. Diana was quiet for a long time. This changes everything, she finally said. If your husband is running an investment scam, there could be criminal charges. And if there are criminal charges, any assets he has could be frozen or seized to pay back victims. What does that mean for me? It means we need to move faster. If Michael gets arrested, or if his clients file civil suits, you could lose everything, including assets that are legitimately yours. We need to establish what belongs to you separately from what belongs to him, and we need to do it quickly. Sunday morning, I called Margaret Walsh at home. I'd never called a lawyer on a Sunday before, but this felt like an emergency. Margaret, I think my husband is embezzling money from his clients. She was all business, even on a weekend. Tell me everything. After I explained about David Martinez, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Rebecca, listen to me very carefully. You need to document everything you can about your separate assets. Things that are in your name only, things you brought into the marriage, things you can prove belong to you personally. And you need to do it immediately. Why immediately? Because if Michael is running a Ponzi scheme or investment fraud, his victims are going to come after everything he owns, including the house you live in, the cars you drive, the bank accounts with your name on them. We need to protect you before this becomes public. I spent Sunday afternoon going through every document in Michael's office. Bank statements, investment records, business files, everything. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Michael had been moving money around for months, not just to fund his affairs but to cover what looked like a systematic scheme of stealing from clients and using new investments to pay back older ones. The classic structure of a Ponzi scheme. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten notebook hidden in his desk drawer. In Michael's neat handwriting were names, dates, and amounts. The Martinez family wasn't the only victim. There were at least 8 other families, representing nearly $2 million in investments that had never been invested. I photographed every page with shaking hands. My husband wasn't just a cheating spouse, he was a criminal who had been using our home, our life, our reputation as cover for a systematic fraud. That evening, Michael came home with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, as if nothing had happened. We ate dinner and made small talk. He even mentioned that he'd cleared up the confusion with David Martinez. Everything's fine, he said, refilling my wine glass. Just a paperwork mix-up. But everything wasn't fine. Everything was about to explode. Monday morning, after Michael left for work, I called Margaret again. I found his records, I said. He's been running a Ponzi scheme for at least 8 months. Nearly $2 million. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca, I need you to listen very carefully. You're about to be in the middle of a federal investigation. Your husband is going to be arrested, probably within days once his victims start filing complaints. You need to make some decisions right now about how you want to handle this. What kind of decisions? Do you want to be a victim or a cooperating witness? Because those are your 2 choices. You can claim you had no knowledge of his activities, or you can actively help the investigation. But you need to decide now, before the FBI shows up at your door. The FBI. I felt dizzy thinking about federal agents searching our house, questioning our neighbors, freezing our bank accounts. What happens to our kids if he's arrested? They'll be fine. They're adults, and they're not implicated in any of this. But Rebecca, if you want to salvage anything from this marriage, financially, you need to act fast. What do you recommend? I recommend you call the FBI yourself. Today. Cooperate fully with their investigation. Show them you're a victim too, not an accomplice. And hope that when the dust settles, You can keep your house and enough assets to rebuild your life. After I hung up with Margaret, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. 23 years of marriage, and it had come to this, me calling the FBI to report my own husband. But David Martinez deserved his retirement money back. The other victims deserved justice. And I deserved to get out of this with something left of my life. I looked up the number for the FBI's White Plains field office and dialed before I could change my mind. FBI, how can I help you? I'd like to report an investment fraud, I said. My husband has been stealing money from his clients. The FBI moved faster than I expected. Within 6 hours of my phone call, 2 agents were sitting in my living room, recording our conversation while I handed over every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Michael, despite the shared last name, was probably in her 30s, with a kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd built her career on cases like this. Her partner, Agent Rodriguez, was older and quieter, but I could tell he was listening to every word. Mrs. Chen, Agent Sarah Chen said, I want to be clear about your status in this investigation. Based on what you've told us and the evidence you've provided, we're treating you as a victim and a cooperating witness. That means you're protected, but it also means we need your complete honesty. Is there anything about your husband's activities that you haven't told us? I thought about Jessica, about the affairs, about the secret bank account. None of that was relevant to the investment fraud, but I'd learned that secrets had a way of coming back to bite you. He's been having affairs, I said. At least one current relationship, probably others in the past. He opened a secret bank account to fund them, taking money from our joint account. The agents exchanged glances. How much money? Agent Rodriguez asked. About $12,000 over 8 months. That's actually helpful, Agent Chen said. It establishes a pattern of deception and secret financial activity. It supports the fraud case. They asked me to walk them through Michael's schedule, his habits, his daily routine. They wanted to know when he'd be home, when he'd be at his office, when they could execute search warrants without creating a public scene. We'll arrest him tomorrow morning at his office, Agent Chen said. We'll search the office and your home simultaneously. I need you to be here when we execute the home search warrant, but I want you to know that we don't consider you a suspect. After they left, I called Emma and Jake. This was the conversation I'd been dreading since David Martinez appeared on my doorstep. I need to tell you both something about your father, I said when I had them both on a 3-way call. He's going to be arrested tomorrow. The silence on the line was deafening. Arrested for what? Emma finally asked, her voice small. Investment fraud. He's been stealing money from his clients. Jake spoke up. Mom, are you serious? Dad would never. I'm serious, I interrupted. The FBI has been investigating. They have evidence. I've seen it myself. I explained everything I could without going into the personal details about the affairs. My children didn't need to know about Jessica and the others. They'd have enough to process without that additional betrayal. What happens to us? Emma asked. To you? To the house? I don't know yet. But I want you both to know that whatever happens, we'll get through this together. After we hung up, I called my sister Lauren. I need you to know something, I said when she answered. Michael's being arrested tomorrow for embezzlement. Lauren was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Lauren. I'm here, she said. Rebecca, are you okay? Are you safe? I'm safe. I'm the one who reported him to the FBI. Good, Lauren said fiercely. Good for you. Do you need me to come down? Not yet. But I might need you soon. That evening was surreal. Michael came home with flowers, grocery store roses this time, and news that he'd completely resolved the situation with David Martinez. It was exactly what I thought, he said as he put the roses in a vase. Just a paperwork mix-up. David was satisfied once I showed him the correct investment documents. He was such a good liar. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed him completely. We had dinner together, watched television, went through our normal bedtime routine. Michael even initiated sex, which I managed to participate in while feeling like I was floating outside my body, watching someone else's life. Afterward, as Michael slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this would be the last night we'd ever spend in this bed as husband and wife. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Chen? This is Agent Rodriguez. We have your husband in custody. The search team will be at your house in 15 minutes. I woke up alone. Michael had already left for work, directly into the arms of the FBI. The search team was professional but thorough. They went through every room, every closet, every drawer. They took Michael's computer from his office, boxes of documents, even some of our family photos that showed expensive vacations or purchases. They'll use those to establish lifestyle and spending patterns, Margaret explained when she arrived to observe the search. It's all about proving that he was living beyond his legitimate means. While the FBI searched our house, I sat in my kitchen with Margaret and tried to process the fact that my marriage was over. Not just over because of the affairs or the lies, but over because my husband was probably going to prison. Agent Chen found me before the search team left. Your husband has been charged with wire fraud and investment advisor fraud, she said. His bail hearing is this afternoon. Given the amount of money involved and the risk of flight, we'll be requesting that he be held without bail. What happens now? Now you try to rebuild your life. The asset seizure team will be here tomorrow to inventory everything that might be subject to forfeiture. But Margaret tells me she's filed paperwork to protect your separate property, so hopefully you'll be able to keep the house and your personal assets. After everyone left, I sat alone in my violated house and tried to figure out what to feel. Relief that Michael's crimes had been exposed? Grief for the end of my marriage? Anger at the years of deception? All of the above, probably. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Michael, somehow allowed to call from jail. But it was from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Chen, this is Jessica Morrison. I think we need to talk. Jessica. Michael's girlfriend. The woman he'd been stealing from our marriage to wine and dine while I planned family dinners and anniversary trips. I stared at that text message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to block her number, to pretend that part of Michael's double life didn't exist. But another part of me was curious. What could Jessica possibly want to say to me? I texted back, "What about?" Her response came immediately, "Michael lied to both of us. I just found out he's married. I had no idea about you." I almost laughed. After everything, the investment fraud, the FBI, the search of my house, Michael's girlfriend was worried about being the other woman. But then I thought about it more carefully. If Jessica had really believed Michael was single, then she was as much a victim of his deception as I was. Maybe more so, because at least I'd had 23 years of real marriage before discovering the lies. I texted back, "Can you meet today? There's a Starbucks on Main Street in White Plains." Yes. 1 hour. An hour later, I was sitting across from the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for months. Jessica Morrison was even more beautiful in person than in her Instagram photos, but she looked devastated. Her eyes were red from crying, and she kept twisting her hands in her lap. "I'm so sorry," were the first words out of her mouth. I would never have gotten involved if I'd known he was married. Looking at her, I believed her. There was something genuine about her distress, something that told me she wasn't the calculating homewrecker I'd imagined. "How long?" I asked. 6 months. He told me he was divorced, that it had been finalized 2 years ago. He said you two were friends but had just grown apart. Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue. He was so convincing. He showed me pictures of the house and said it was his place, that he'd bought you out in the divorce. What changed? How did you find out the truth? The news, Jessica said. When I saw his arrest on the news this morning, they mentioned his wife. I looked you up online and realized. God, I've been so stupid. We talked for an hour. Jessica told me about their relationship, about the expensive restaurants and weekend trips that Michael had funded with stolen money. She told me about the plans they'd made, how he'd promised to take her to Europe in the spring, how he'd talked about buying a condo in Manhattan where they could live together. All lies. All paid for with money stolen from his clients' retirement accounts. There's something else, Jessica said as we prepared to leave. Last week, Michael asked me to open a joint bank account with him. He said it was for our future together, but he wanted to put a large deposit in it right away. I was supposed to meet him at the bank tomorrow. I felt cold all over. How large? $200,000. He said it was a bonus from work, that he wanted to secure our future together. Michael hadn't just been stealing from his clients. He'd been preparing to disappear with Jessica and $200,000 of stolen money, leaving me to face the consequences of his crimes alone. But he'd underestimated both of us. Jessica had unknowingly helped expose his escape plan, and I'd made sure the FBI was waiting for him instead of a romantic getaway. "Thank you for telling me," I said as we stood up to leave. "Mrs. Chen." Jessica looked young and lost. "What happens now?" "Now we both try to put our lives back together. And we let the justice system handle Michael." As I drove home from that surreal coffee meeting, I realized something had shifted inside me. The anger was still there, the hurt was still raw, but underneath it all was something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. The lies were finally over. The double life had collapsed. Michael's victims would get justice, and I could start figuring out who I was without 23 years of deception shaping my reality. It was going to be hard. But for the first time in months, I could see a future that wasn't built on lies. The next few days passed in a blur of lawyers, federal agents, and reporters. Michael's arrest had made the local news. Local financial advisor charged with $2 million investment fraud, and suddenly our quiet neighborhood was full of news vans and curious neighbors. I stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. Every trip to the grocery store meant running a gauntlet of reporters asking if I'd known about my husband's crimes, if I was complicit, if I felt sorry for the victims. The victims. That's what haunted me most. The Martinez family wasn't alone. As the FBI investigation progressed, more families came forward. Couples in their 60s who'd trusted Michael with their life savings. Parents who'd been planning for their children's college educations. A widow who'd given him her late husband's insurance payout to invest. All of them betrayed. All of them facing financial ruin because they'd trusted the man I'd shared a bed with for 23 years. Margaret was working around the clock to protect my assets from seizure, but the process was complicated. Everything Michael and I owned together was potentially subject to forfeiture to compensate his victims. The house, the cars, our joint retirement accounts, all of it could be taken to pay back the stolen money. The good news, Margaret told me during one of our daily phone calls, is that the prenup you signed 23 years ago is actually going to help you now. We had a prenup. I'd honestly forgotten about it. When you're young and in love, a prenuptial agreement feels like a formality, something lawyers make you do but never expect to need. It protects the assets you brought into the marriage and establishes that you have separate property rights. Your freelance business, your retirement account from before you married Michael, the inheritance from your grandmother, those should be safe. Small comfort when I was about to lose the home where I'd raised my children and the life I'd built over 2 decades. But it was something. 3 days after Michael's arrest, I had to make a decision I'd been dreading, whether to visit him in jail. He'd been denied bail, as Agent Chen had predicted. Too much money involved, too much evidence of deception, too high a risk that he'd flee to a country without extradition treaties. So he was sitting in the federal detention center in Manhattan, probably wearing an orange jumpsuit and wondering how his carefully constructed life had collapsed so completely. Part of me wanted to see him, to look him in the eye and ask how he could have done this to our family, to his clients, to me. But another part of me never wanted to see Michael Chen again. In the end, the decision was made for me. I was in the kitchen Thursday morning, trying to force myself to eat breakfast, when my phone rang. Unknown number. But I'd learned to answer everything in case it was important. "Rebecca, it's Michael." His voice sounded different. Smaller, Somehow. Defeated. I'm allowed one phone call, and I wanted it to be to you. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I know you probably hate me right now, he continued. I know you have every right to hate me. But I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. Which part? I finally managed to say. The stealing, the lying, the affairs, all of it. Silence on the other end of the line. You know about Jessica, he said finally. I know about Jessica. I know about the others. I know about the secret bank account. I know about everything, Michael. Another long silence. How long have you known? Long enough. Long enough to protect myself and our children from the consequences of your choices. The FBI said you're the one who reported me. I am. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to process the fact that his wife of 23 years had been the one to bring his world crashing down. Why? He asked. Because David Martinez deserved to get his retirement savings back. Because the 8 other families you stole from deserved justice. Because our children deserve to know who their father really is. And because you wanted revenge. I thought about that. Was this revenge? Or was it just doing the right thing? Maybe, I said. But mostly because I couldn't live with the lies anymore. Rebecca, I know I can't undo what I've done. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. That broke something inside me. After everything, the fraud, the affairs, the systematic deception, he was going to claim he loved me? You don't steal from your children's college funds because you love your wife, I said. You don't risk your family's home and security for a fair money because you love your wife. You don't lie to someone for years because you love them. I was going to pay it all back, Michael said desperately. The client money, everything. I just needed time to make some investments work out. With what money? The $200,000 you were planning to run away with. Silence. Jessica told me about the bank account, I said. About your plan to disappear together. Were you even going to tell me you were leaving? Or was I just supposed to wake up one morning and find you gone? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? But Michael didn't have an answer for that. The time limit for his phone call was up anyway. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen crying for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not for Michael. I was done crying for Michael. But for the life I'd thought we had, for the man I'd thought he was, for the naive woman who'd believed that love and trust were the same thing. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom, are you okay? Jake and I want to come home. I texted back, I'm okay. But maybe it would be good to have you both here this weekend. Having my children home helped more than I'd expected. Emma and Jake were dealing with their own shock and grief over their father's crimes, but they were also protective of me in a way that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. Jake, practical like his father but with a moral compass Michael had apparently lost years ago, spent Saturday afternoon helping me go through financial documents and figuring out what our new reality might look like. Mom, he said as we sat at the kitchen table with bank statements spread out between us, I need to ask you something. Anything. Did you have any idea? About Dad, I mean. About what he was doing. I looked at my 19-year-old son, this young man who was trying to understand how the father he'd admired could have betrayed everyone who trusted him. About the affairs, yes. I found out a few weeks ago. But about the stealing from clients? I had no idea until David Martinez showed up at our door. How did you find out about the affairs? I told him about the text message, about hiring Diana, about the photographs and the secret bank account. Jake listened without judgment, though I could see anger building in his eyes. I'm proud of you, he said when I finished. For what? For not letting him get away with it. For protecting yourself. For doing the right thing even when it was hard. Emma was less practical but more emotionally supportive. She spent the weekend cooking meals I barely touched and fielding phone calls from reporters and curiosity seekers. She also helped me box up Michael's belongings, his clothes, his books, his personal items, preparing for the reality that he wasn't coming back to this house. "What do you want me to do with these?" Emma asked, holding up a framed photo of our family from last Christmas. We all looked so happy in that picture. So normal. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't look at them right now, but someday the kids might want some of these memories." "We'll store them," Emma said diplomatically. "You don't have to decide anything right now." Sunday evening, as Emma and Jake were getting ready to drive back to their respective schools, Emma pulled me aside. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." My stomach clenched. After the past 2 weeks, I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. "Last month, when I was home for fall break, I answered Dad's phone when you were in the shower. Someone named Jessica asked for him. When I said he wasn't available, she said to tell him she missed him and was looking forward to their weekend plans." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought maybe it was a client or a coworker. But it bothered me. The way she said it, like she knew him really well. Like they were close." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I should have said something." "Honey, no. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault or Jake's fault or my fault. This is all on your father." But I could see the guilt in Emma's eyes, the same guilt I'd been carrying about not seeing the signs sooner, about not being smarter, about not protecting our family better. "We're all going to have to forgive ourselves for not knowing," I said, as much to myself as to Emma. "Your father was very good at lying. That's not a reflection on us." After the kids left, the house felt enormous and empty. I walked through rooms that had been our family's life for 15 years, rooms that now felt like a museum of a marriage that had never been real. In Michael's office, I found a bottle of expensive scotch he'd been saving for a special occasion. I opened it and poured myself a glass, then sat in his leather desk chair and stared out the window at our backyard. Tomorrow, I had to meet with the asset forfeiture team to determine which of our possessions would be seized to pay back Michael's victims. Tuesday, I had another meeting with Margaret to discuss divorce proceedings. Wednesday, I was supposed to testify before the grand jury about what I'd known and when I'd known it. My old life was over. The question now was what came next. I raised the glass of Michael's expensive scotch in a toast to no one in particular. "To new beginnings," I said to the empty room. "And to the truth, finally." 2 weeks after Michael's arrest, I thought I'd heard the worst of it. The FBI had frozen most of our assets, the media attention was dying down, and I was beginning to accept that my comfortable life in Westchester was over. Margaret was negotiating with the prosecutors to let me keep the house, at least temporarily, and I was making plans to restart my consulting business to support myself. I was getting ready to drive to Jake's college for Parents' Weekend, something we'd planned months ago when our biggest worry was whether he was eating enough vegetables in the dining hall. The irony wasn't lost on me, playing the role of normal parent when my husband was sitting in federal prison awaiting trial for embezzling nearly $2 million. I was in my bedroom, packing an overnight bag, when my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, "Call me immediately." My hands started shaking as I dialed her number. After everything that had happened, Margaret wasn't the type to use all caps unless it was truly urgent. "Rebecca," she answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "At home, packing for Jake's Parents' Weekend." "Why?" "You need to sit down. I just got off the phone with the federal prosecutor handling Michael's case." I sank onto my bed, suddenly dizzy. "What now?" "There's been a development in the investigation. A big one." Margaret paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. "Rebecca, Michael's crimes go back much further than we thought. And the amount of money involved is significantly higher." "How much higher?" "Try $5.7 million. Over 6 years." The room spun around me. $5.7 million. I'd thought $2 million was devastating, but this was beyond anything I could comprehend. "That's not all," Margaret continued. "The FBI has been tracking some of the stolen money, and some of it went to purchase assets in your name." "What does that mean?" It means the car you drive, some of the jewelry you own, even some of the home improvements you've made over the past few years, they were purchased with stolen client money. The government is going to argue that you benefited from your husband's crimes. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I didn't know. I know you didn't know. But proving that is going to be complicated. The prosecutors are offering you a choice: cooperate fully with their investigation and agree to forfeit any assets purchased with stolen money, or face potential charges as an accessory after the fact. Accessory to what? I didn't know about any of this. Rebecca, listen to me carefully. 3 years ago, you co-signed a loan application for Michael's business expansion. Do you remember that? I did remember. Michael had needed additional credit to grow his practice, and adding my name to the application had improved the terms. It had seemed like a routine business decision at the time. That loan application contained false information about the business's assets and income. Information that Michael now admits was fraudulent. By co-signing, you technically became part of the fraud, even if you didn't know the information was false. My legs gave out completely, and I slumped onto the floor of my bedroom. Everything in this room, the furniture, the art, even the clothes in my closet, how much of it had been purchased with money stolen from retirees and families planning for their children's futures? What happens if I cooperate? You'll likely avoid criminal charges, but you'll have to forfeit anything purchased with stolen money. That includes your car, most of your jewelry, and probably a significant portion of the equity in this house. And if I don't cooperate? You could face federal charges for conspiracy and money laundering. Even if we fight and win, the legal costs would bankrupt you, and the process could take years. I closed my eyes and tried to think. How had my life become a series of impossible choices between bad outcomes and worse outcomes? There's something else, Margaret said gently. The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. They're offering you full immunity in exchange for your complete cooperation, but the offer expires at noon tomorrow. What does complete cooperation mean? It means you tell them everything you know about Michael's business, his habits, his associates. It means you help them trace every dollar that went through your household. And it means you testify against him at trial. Testify against my husband. The man I'd shared a bed with for 23 years, the father of my children, the person who'd been the center of my adult life. After everything he'd done, the lies, the affairs, the theft, he was still my husband. The thought of sitting in a courtroom and helping send him to prison felt like a betrayal of something fundamental. But then I thought about David Martinez and his wife, who'd lost their retirement savings. About the other victims whose names I'd learned over the past 2 weeks. About my own children, who deserved a mother who was brave enough to stand up for what was right. I'll take the deal, I said. Are you sure? This isn't a decision you can take back. I thought about Michael's phone call from jail, about his claim that he'd never meant for any of this to happen, about his promise that he'd never stopped loving me, even as he was planning to run away with Jessica and $200,000 of stolen money. I'm sure. The next morning, I sat in a conference room in the federal courthouse in White Plains, surrounded by prosecutors, FBI agents, and Margaret. The immunity agreement was 12 pages long, and I read every word before signing it. Mrs. Chen, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams, a woman about my age with prematurely gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much corruption, we appreciate your cooperation. This is going to be difficult, but your testimony is crucial to ensuring that all of your husband's victims receive justice. Over the next 4 hours, I told them everything. Michael's work schedule, his travel patterns, his business associates, the home improvements we'd made, the vacations we'd taken, the gifts he'd given me over the years. I described our financial routine, how Michael had handled all our investments and major purchases while I focused on day-to-day expenses. They showed me bank records, credit card statements, and purchase receipts, asking me to identify what I remembered about each transaction. Some I recognized: the kitchen renovation 2 years ago, the new car I'd been driving, the diamond earrings Michael had given me for our 20th anniversary. All of it purchased with stolen money. We estimate that approximately $340,000 in stolen funds went directly to your household expenses and purchases over the past 3 years, Agent Chen explained. Under the forfeiture agreement, you'll need to surrender the car, the jewelry, and agree to a lien on your house for the amount of stolen money that went into home improvements. I nodded numbly. It was better than prison, but it still felt like losing everything. There's one more thing, Agent Rodriguez said, pulling out another set of documents. We found evidence that your husband was planning to flee the country. He had a passport in another name, airline tickets to a non-extradition country, and offshore bank accounts we're still trying to trace. They showed me copies of documents I'd never seen before. A fake passport with Michael's photo but a different name. Flight reservations to the Cayman Islands for 2 people. Bank account applications for institutions in countries that didn't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. He wasn't planning to take you with him, Agent Rodriguez said gently. Based on the travel documents, he was planning to disappear with Jessica Morrison and approximately $1.2 million in stolen funds. I stared at the fake passport photo. Michael's face, but the name read David Thompson. Even his escape plan had been built on lies. When? I managed to ask. We believe he was planning to leave sometime in the next month. Probably right after he convinced Ms. Morrison to open that joint bank account. So Michael hadn't just been stealing from his clients to fund affairs and expensive gifts. He'd been planning to abandon our marriage, our children, our entire life together, leaving me to face the consequences of his crimes alone. The meeting ended with a schedule for my continued cooperation. I would need to review more financial documents, help trace additional stolen funds, and eventually testify before a grand jury and at Michael's trial. As I walked out of the federal courthouse, I called Jake to cancel our parents' weekend plans. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked when I explained that something urgent had come up. "I will be," I said. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it. That afternoon, I drove to the Federal Detention Center in Manhattan. It was time to have a conversation with my husband. The visiting room was exactly what you'd expect from a federal prison. Fluorescent lighting, plastic chairs, the constant hum of air circulation systems. Michael appeared after a 20-minute wait, wearing orange scrubs and looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. He sat across from me at a small table, his hands folded in front of him. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't. How are Emma and Jake handling this?" "They're devastated. Their father is a federal criminal. How do you think they're handling it?" Michael winced. "I never wanted this to hurt them. But you did it anyway." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, other inmates visited with their families, conversations mixing together into a low murmur of disappointment and broken promises. "I know about the passport," I said finally. "David Thompson. I know about the offshore accounts. I know you were planning to disappear with Jessica and over $1 million in stolen money." Michael's face went white. "Rebecca. Were you even going to say goodbye? Or was I just supposed to wake up one morning and find you gone?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "What was it supposed to happen like? You steal money from families' retirement accounts, abandon your wife and children, and live happily ever after in the Cayman Islands with your girlfriend." "I was going to pay everyone back," Michael said desperately. "I had investments that were supposed to pay off. I was going to return all the client money and then run away anyway." Michael looked down at his hands. "I felt trapped. In our marriage, in my business, in this life we'd built. I know that's not an excuse, but I felt like I couldn't breathe. So you decided to steal millions of dollars and destroy multiple families instead of just asking for a divorce." "I didn't plan for it to get this big. It started small, just borrowing a little money from one client to pay back another. But then it snowballed, and I couldn't see a way out. There's always a way out that doesn't involve destroying innocent people's lives." Michael was quiet for a long time. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. For the affairs, For the lying, for putting you and the kids through this. You didn't deserve any of this. I studied my husband's face. After 23 years of marriage, I'd thought I knew every expression, every tell, every sign of what he was really thinking. But looking at him now, I realized I'd never really known him at all. The prosecutors offered me immunity in exchange for my cooperation, I said. Good. That's good. I was worried they might try to blame you. I took the deal. Michael nodded slowly. I'm glad. You need to protect yourself. It means I'll have to testify against you at trial. Something flickered in Michael's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hurt. But then he nodded again. I understand. You're doing what you have to do. I stood up to leave. There was nothing more to say, no way to bridge the gap between the man I'd thought I married and the criminal sitting across from me. Rebecca! Michael called as I reached the door. I turned back. For what it's worth, I really did love you. I know you don't believe that now, but it's true. I looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who'd shared my bed, raised my children, and built a life with me based on lies. Maybe you did love me, I said finally. But you loved yourself more. As I walked out of that prison, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Free. Free from the lies, free from the uncertainty, free from the suffocating weight of living with someone who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. My old life was gone. My marriage was over. Most of my possessions would be seized to compensate Michael's victims. But I was finally, completely free to build something new. And this time, it would be built on truth. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom wearing a navy blue suit I'd bought at Target, a far cry from the designer clothes that had been purchased with stolen money and subsequently seized by the government. The trial of United States versus Michael Chen was in its 3rd week, and today I was scheduled to testify against my husband. My husband. Even after everything, even after the divorce papers had been filed and the house had been sold to pay back victims, I still sometimes thought of him that way. 23 years of marriage don't disappear overnight, even when they were built on lies. The courtroom was packed. Michael's victims sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, the Martinez family, the elderly couple who'd lost their life savings, the single mother who'd trusted Michael with her late husband's insurance money. Behind the defense table sat Michael's sister and his elderly parents, who'd flown in from California and still seemed to believe this was all some terrible misunderstanding. My children weren't there. Emma was finishing her senior year at Syracuse, and Jake was at Penn State. We'd agreed they didn't need to see their mother testify against their father, didn't need that particular trauma added to everything else they were processing. Michael looked smaller in his dark suit, sitting next to his defense attorney, an expensive lawyer named Harrison Webb who specialized in white-collar crimes. 6 months in federal detention hadn't been kind to Michael. He'd lost weight, his hair was graying, and he had the pallor of someone who hadn't seen much sunlight. When our eyes met across the courtroom, he gave me the smallest of nods. Not apologetic, exactly, but acknowledging. We both knew why I was there. The government calls Rebecca Chen to the stand, announced Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams. I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. The bailiff administered the oath, and I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. After 6 months of living with the consequences of lies, truth felt like the only thing left that mattered. Mrs. Chen, Patricia Williams began, please state your relationship to the defendant. Michael Chen is my estranged husband. We were married for 23 years. And when did you first become aware that your husband was defrauding his investment clients? I told the story I'd rehearsed dozens of times with the prosecutors. The text message from Jessica that started my investigation. Hiring Diana Reeves. The discovery of the secret bank account. David Martinez showing up at our door. At any point during your 23-year marriage, did you suspect your husband of financial impropriety? No. Michael handled all our investments and major financial decisions. I trusted him completely. Did you ever question expensive purchases, unexplained income, or unusual financial activity? No. Michael told me his business was successful, and I had no reason to doubt him. The questioning went on for 2 hours. Patricia Williams walked me through bank records, credit card statements, and purchase receipts, establishing that I'd had no knowledge of the source of the money funding our lifestyle. But the hardest part came when she asked me about the fake passport and escape plan. Mrs. Chen, were you aware that your husband had obtained fraudulent identification documents?
No.
Were you aware that he was planning to flee the country?
No.
Were you aware of his relationship with Jessica Morrison? My voice caught slightly. Not until I discovered it myself. And how did that discovery make you feel? Harrison Webb objected, relevance, but the judge allowed it. Betrayed, I said. Not just because of the affair, but because I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life, had been built on lies. When Patricia Williams finished, Harrison Webb stood for cross-examination. I'd been dreading this part, knowing that Michael's defense would be to paint him as a man who'd made mistakes but wasn't the calculating criminal the government claimed. Mrs. Chen, Webb began, you've testified that you were unaware of your husband's business activities. But you benefited from those activities, didn't you? I lived in a house and drove a car that I later learned were purchased with stolen money, yes. You wore jewelry purchased with stolen money?
Yes.
You went on vacations paid for with stolen money?
Yes.
And you never questioned where this money was coming from? I took a deep breath. This was the question I'd been preparing for. Mr. Webb, my husband was a financial advisor. His business appeared to be successful. We lived comfortably but not extravagantly. I had no reason to suspect that the money funding our lifestyle was stolen from his clients. But you must have noticed that your lifestyle exceeded your legitimate income. Our lifestyle was consistent with what I believed our legitimate income to be. Webb pressed me for another hour, trying to establish that I'd been willfully blind to signs that should have made me suspicious. But I'd been over every detail with the prosecutors dozens of times, and I was ready for every question. The most difficult moment came when Webb asked me about my decision to report Michael to the FBI. Mrs. Chen, when you discovered your husband's activities, why didn't you confront him directly? Why didn't you try to work things out privately? I looked across the courtroom at Michael, who was staring down at his hands. Because David Martinez and the other victims deserved to get their money back, I said. Because my children deserved to know the truth about their father. And because I couldn't live with being complicit in covering up crimes that had destroyed innocent families. So you decided to destroy your own family instead. The question hung in the air. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me, the victims, Michael's family, the jury, the media. Mr. Webb, I said slowly, my family was already destroyed. It was destroyed the moment my husband decided to steal from his clients' retirement accounts to fund affairs and plan his escape. I didn't destroy my family. I just refused to help him cover up what he'd done. After I finished testifying, I sat in the gallery for the rest of the trial. I heard from Michael's victims, who described the devastating impact his crimes had had on their lives. I heard from FBI agents who detailed the elaborate scheme he'd constructed. I heard from financial experts who explained how Ponzi schemes work and how Michael had used new investments to pay back earlier ones until the whole structure collapsed. Michael's defense was that he'd never intended to permanently deprive his clients of their money, that he genuinely believed his investments would pay off and allow him to return everything he'd borrowed. It was a legal distinction, the difference between theft and unauthorized borrowing, but it wasn't convincing given the fake passport and offshore accounts. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, investment advisor fraud, money laundering. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 months later. I didn't speak to Michael after the verdict was read. There was nothing left to say. 2 months later, I returned to the courthouse for sentencing. This time, several victims spoke about the impact Michael's crimes had had on their lives. David Martinez, now working part-time at age 68 because his retirement savings were gone. An elderly woman named Margaret Kowalski, who'd lost her late husband's life insurance money and was now living with her daughter. A young couple who'd had to abandon their plans to buy their first home. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he stood and faced the victims. "I know that nothing I say can undo the harm I've caused," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know that my actions have devastated families and destroyed trust. I take full responsibility for my choices, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." He turned toward where I was sitting in the gallery. "I especially want to apologize to my wife and children, who are victims of my crimes just as much as anyone else in this courtroom. Rebecca, Emma, Jake, I'm sorry I betrayed your trust and destroyed our family. You deserved better from me." The judge sentenced Michael to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $5.7 million in restitution, money he didn't have, money that would probably never be fully recovered. As the bailiff led Michael away in handcuffs, our eyes met one last time. He mouthed the words "I'm sorry," and I nodded. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement that we'd reached the end of something that had once been beautiful and was now irretrievably broken. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The marriage that had defined my adult life was officially over. The man I'd loved for 23 years was going to prison. The comfortable life I'd built was gone. But for the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood. No more lies, no more secrets, no more wondering what was real and what was performance. Just the truth, painful and liberating at the same time. 1 year after Michael's sentencing, I was sitting in a small apartment in Stamford, Connecticut, drinking coffee from a mug that cost $3 at Target and watching the sunrise through windows that didn't have custom blinds or designer curtains. It wasn't the life I'd planned. But it was honest. The apartment was a one-bedroom in a complex that housed mostly graduate students and young professionals. I'd chosen it because the rent was affordable and because no one knew my story. I could be just Rebecca, the freelance marketing consultant in 2B, not Rebecca Chen, the wife of the financial advisor who stole nearly $6 million from retirees and families. My consulting business was slowly rebuilding. Word-of-mouth referrals had led to 3 steady clients, and I was making enough money to cover my expenses and put a little aside each month. It wasn't the comfortable financial cushion I'd enjoyed during my marriage, but it was money I'd earned myself, money that wasn't tainted by someone else's crimes. The government had seized most of our assets to compensate Michael's victims. The house in Westchester, sold at auction. My car, the jewelry, even some furniture that had been purchased with stolen money. I'd been allowed to keep my personal belongings, my laptop, and about $15,000 from accounts that predated Michael's crimes. It was enough to start over, which was all I'd really needed. Emma had graduated from Syracuse and was working for a non-profit in Boston, doing communications work that she found meaningful. She visited me once a month, usually bringing takeout and stories about her job, her boyfriend, her life that was moving forward despite everything that had happened. Jake had changed his major from business to social work. "I want to help people," he told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Not take advantage of them." He was graduating this spring and planning to work with at-risk youth. I was proud of both my children for the way they'd processed their father's crimes and chosen to move forward with integrity. Neither of them had visited Michael in prison, though they'd exchanged a few letters with him. That was their choice to make, and I supported whatever relationship they wanted or didn't want to have with their father. As for me, I hadn't spoken to Michael since his sentencing. There was nothing left to say. He was serving his 12-year sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania, and according to his lawyer, he was teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates. The irony wasn't lost on me. But this isn't really a story about Michael anymore. It's a story about what happens when everything you thought was solid turns out to be built on lies, and how you find the strength to build something new from the pieces that are left. The hardest part of the past year hadn't been the financial struggles or the media attention that had eventually died down. It had been learning to trust my own judgment again. When you discover that you've been living with a master manipulator for 23 years, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about reading people, about recognizing truth, about protecting yourself. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. Once a week, I sat in her comfortable office and tried to understand how I'd missed so many signs, how I'd allowed myself to be so completely deceived. You trusted your husband, Dr. Kim had said during one of our early sessions. That's not a character flaw. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on. The problem wasn't that you trusted him. The problem was that he violated that trust systematically and deliberately. But there were signs, I'd insisted. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the changes in his behavior. I should have paid attention. Rebecca, you're not a detective. You're a wife who assumed her husband was acting in good faith. That's normal. That's healthy. Michael's ability to deceive you says nothing about your intelligence or your worth as a person. Those conversations helped, but the real healing came from taking concrete steps to build a life that was entirely my own. I joined a support group for spouses of white-collar criminals, a surprisingly large demographic, it turned out. Listening to other women who discovered that their comfortable lives were built on fraud, embezzlement, or tax evasion helped me understand that I wasn't alone in this experience. There was Sarah, whose husband had been skimming from his law firm's client accounts for years. Maria, whose husband had been running a fake charity and pocketing donations. Linda, whose husband had been filing false insurance claims for his small business. All of us struggling with the same questions. How did we not know? How do we trust again? How do we rebuild our lives from the ashes of marriages that had been built on lies? But there were success stories too. Women who'd started new careers, found new love, built new lives that were smaller but more authentic than what they'd lost. 6 months ago, I'd started dating again. His name was Tom, and he was a high school history teacher I'd met through one of my clients. He was divorced, had 2 teenage kids, and knew my story before our first coffee date. I appreciate you being upfront about everything, he'd said when I'd explained about Michael's crimes and the trial. But you know that's his history, not yours, right? It had taken me a long time to believe that, but I was starting to. Tom was nothing like Michael. Where Michael had been polished and successful and secretly deceptive, Tom was straightforward and unpretentious and almost aggressively honest. He taught AP history at a public school in Stamford, coached the debate team, and lived in a modest house he'd bought after his own divorce 5 years earlier. Our relationship was moving slowly, which suited both of us. We had dinner once or twice a week, went to movies, took long walks along the Connecticut coast. Sometimes he cooked for me in his kitchen, and I helped him grade papers. It was quiet and normal and real in a way that my marriage to Michael had never been. You know what I like about you, Tom had said a few weeks ago as we sat on his back porch watching his teenage daughter practice soccer in the yard. What's that? You're not trying to be anyone other than who you are. After my divorce, I dated women who were performing their lives, you know? Trying to impress me with their careers or their houses or their social media presence. But you're just yourself. It's refreshing. It was refreshing to me too. For the first time in my adult life, I was in a relationship with someone who knew the worst thing that had ever happened to me and chose to be with me anyway. Not because he was impressed by my house or my lifestyle or my husband's success, but because he liked the person I was when all of that was stripped away. This morning, as I sat in my small apartment drinking $3 coffee and watching the sunrise, I got a text message that made me smile. It was from Emma. Mom, I'm bringing someone to meet you next weekend. His name is David, and he's really special. Fair warning, he's a teacher too, so you and Tom will probably gang up on me about educational policy. My daughter was bringing home someone special. My son was thriving in his social work program. I had a business that was growing, a relationship that felt healthy, and an apartment that was small but mine. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Michael 24 years ago. But it was a good life. An honest life. If you're watching this from wherever you are in the world, dealing with your own betrayal or heartbreak or life that's fallen apart, I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think you are. You can survive having everything you thought was solid turn out to be built on lies. You can rebuild from nothing and create something better than what you lost. It won't be easy. There will be days when you can barely get out of bed, days when you question every decision you've ever made, days when you wonder if you'll ever trust anyone again. But you will. You'll learn to trust your own judgment. You'll learn to recognize the difference between love and manipulation, between partnership and performance. You'll learn that losing everything can sometimes be the beginning of finding yourself. 3 years ago, if someone had told me that my husband was a criminal who would go to prison for stealing millions of dollars from innocent families, I would have laughed. If they told me that I'd lose my house, my comfortable life, everything I thought was permanent, I would have been terrified. But if they told me that I'd survive it all, that I'd be sitting here today feeling grateful for the chance to build something real and honest and entirely my own, I might not have believed them. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the thing that saves you from living a lie. I learned that love without honesty isn't love at all, it's just elaborate manipulation. I learned that comfort built on someone else's crimes isn't comfort, it's borrowed time. And I learned that losing everything material can sometimes be the only way to find out who you really are when all the pretense is stripped away. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 45 years old, and I'm just getting started. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're dealing with your own betrayal or heartbreak, know that you're not alone. There are more of us than you might think, and we're all stronger than we knew. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is the beginning of everything you actually need. You're stronger than you think. Trust me on this one.